let's discuss this. Questions? Questions from anybody? Okay.
This should be a quick and easy one for you. Is the Catholic Church's use of the crucifix tied to their view of Christ on the cross?
That's
currently?
what because the Mass and the center of the Mass is the Eucharist, and the Eucharist is Christ on the cross. That is the centerpiece. That is this culmination of their worship service in the Christian life. That's why Catholics traditionally have Jesus on the cross, and we Protestants, if we have crosses, have him off the cross. That's pretty much the basis for that distinction. Yes, absolutely. And that was a quick question. Look at that. Yes. Other questions? Oh, Jeremy.
I think you and I have talked about this one time before, but I thought maybe it would be good to bring up in the group. I've gone to Catholic weddings.
Yeah.
Catholic weddings, they always do Eucharist in the Catholic wedding.
Yeah.
What is your thoughts on participating in that? We obviously don't believe the same thing.
I think it's forbidden. And let me show you why I think that. 1 Corinthians 10. I think so. I mean, let me argue it. If you don't agree with me, that's fine, but I think so. So in 1 Corinthians, this will actually be a good segue to another argument against transubstantiation, which I didn't have time for. I had to drop out of the message. 1 Corinthians 10, the Bible makes, Paul in 1 Corinthians makes two claims that at first instance look almost contradictory. An idol's temple is nothing. Meat sacrificed to an idol is nothing. You can have the Zeus burger. It's okay. It's not got demons prayed into it. It's fine, right? So like meat that has been used in pagan worship, they later sell in the marketplace. And some Christians, Paul says, by association, think it's tainted. He's like, okay, don't eat it, but like it's fine. You can have your Zeus burger. It's cool. But then he says this, verse 14, chapter 10, verse 14. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to sensible people. Judge for yourselves what I say. The cup of blessing that we bless, is it not a participation or a fellowship or a communion? The Greek literally koinonion, we get communion from, in or of the blood of Jesus Christ. The bread that we break, is it not a participation, a fellowship, a communion, in or of the body of Christ? Because there is one bread, we who are many are one body. For we all partake of the one bread. Consider the people of Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices participants in the altar? What do I imply then? That food offered to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No. I imply what pagans sacrifice they offer to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be participants with demons. For you cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake at the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Shall we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? Here's the distinction. The meat that was in the pagan worship service is not tainted. The pagan worship service is. You could eat the meat the next day in the market. You can't go to the pagan. What you can't say is, this religious rite is false and untrue, and I'm just here having fun, enjoying it. I'm not really participating. No. If you're drinking the cup then and there, you're participants. You're taking part. So if you, as I do, believe the Mass is, the Catholic understanding of the Mass is wrong, denies some core teachings, and taken at its clear face value contradicts the gospel. This is necessary for my salvation. I cannot take part in it with those who think that's what they're doing. I'm fellowshipping in that observance. I'm taking part in that observance. Now, if I found the next day the cup and the bread somewhere, somehow, in some thought experiment, I could eat it and drink it, because it's nothing. But the religious rite, I can't take part in if it's false. So I would say the law is, if you think this is a false religious observance, you are forbidden from participating in it. So I think you could go to the Catholic wedding, and when they offer the communion, you just stay in your seat, and you can witness the wedding. But I don't think the part that is religious observance, where they literally have a cup, you can go do that without taking part in Catholic Mass. And then the question is, can you do that in faith? So that would be the reasoning. But no, it's a good question. But that is the distinction. Participating in, taking part in. This is I'll make a side argument. You guys know that who's the Scottish guy? No, he put his foot in it just recently. Alistair Begg, right? Yeah, Alistair Begg, right? So Alistair Begg's statement about going to the transgender or gay wedding, and the whole argument there hinges upon, can you go and not participate? And he's not as wrong as many people think he is. I think he's wrong. Because what he's saying is, listen to it. You cannot approve of or participate in it. We all agree. The disagreement is he thinks you can go and not approve or participate. And I don't think it works that way. He's not saying it's okay to approve or participate. The question is, does going, the standing up when you stand up when the bride walks in, and sitting down and standing up and going to the wedding reception, does that not make you a participant? I think it does. I think you're a celebrant when you're doing that. He doesn't. I disagree. I think he's wrong. But it's not as big of a deal as some who want to deplatform him are making it, because what we're disagreeing over is what constitutes participation, what constitutes approval. And I'm like, look, if you're standing up and sitting down and acting in one with everything, and then you go to the reception, you're a celebrant, I believe. But this gets back to the point here in 1 Corinthians. You cannot participate in false worship. So that's just got to work out. So, okay. Oh, Steve.
Nitpicking.
Yeah.
Can you go to Nauvoo to the pageant and be proselytized?
Nauvoo to the I'm not familiar with Nauvoo and the pageant.
Nauvoo, Church of Latter-day Saints, they have a big play, and then they have missionaries speak to the audience individually.
Nauvoo, Illinois.
Nauvoo. Oh, okay. So this is new to me. So they do a play, and after the play, they preach their gospel. Whether or not it's advisable, I don't see anything that contradicts this. Nothing you've described sounded like religious worship. Now, if during the play they led everyone in singing songs or something, now it's taking on worship service concepts. And
they sing songs. It is a big production.
No, but the people am I just watching a play, a production, or am I participating? So, I mean, that would be the lines upon which I'd say the issue is. I think most people go see a movie, they don't participate in the movie. Most people go and watch a performance, they don't participate in the performance. So I need to know more to parse that out, but it sounds to me like, no, you're not a participant. So then it just becomes a matter of conscience, freedom, and wisdom. That'd be my understanding. No? Okay. No? You want to keep going?
We had a similar experience at the recent flood movie with Noah.
Yeah.
And people standing up afterwards saying, this is not biblical. And, they were invested.
Sure. But there's people having strong opinions, people preaching and proclaiming is not me joining and drinking the cup with them. So if I go to a movie, and at the movie there's a bunch of people proselytizing the worship of Baal, I haven't suddenly become a Baal worshiper. That's distinct from, we're going to now offer one of our songs to Baal and Molech. We've got the Planned Parenthood van outside, and we're all going to sing and you join in. Okay, you're taking part now. So yeah, that just parsing that out is going to be the distinction. Just simply having people speak and argue their beliefs that you think are wrong doesn't make you a participant or approving of them. I mean, in some sense, if I'm going to have a dialogue with a Catholic or a Mormon or something, politeness means they get a chance to say their position too. I got to hear their position. It doesn't make me, Paul debates and argues in the Areopagus. I didn't say that properly, did I? But I won't try to fix it. Areopagus. Areopagus. There we go. I knew there's an extra syllable that I was missing. Areopagus. Jake.
Sorry, my voice is messed up, but I feel compelled to share this. Don't be surprised if in those situations, when you take this very seriously, you don't get some people that are sort of like, what? The secular world doesn't believe that worship matters. So how or where it's focused, how it's done or where it's focused doesn't matter to them. And I think that's part of what sets us apart, and it should set us apart, is this high view of worship. It matters. How it's done matters because God has given us right ways to do it. But don't be surprised if the world around you is sort of like, whatever, And,
well, no, the secular world, there seems to be a strain in the world that wants to blaspheme and commonize every sign, rite, or ritual. I just saw somebody taking communion with a Dorito and publicly putting that forward, not like someone snapped it on the side. And the point, even the Olympics, right? Let's take signs, flags, anything, things that anyone have any sense of value to, and let's strip them of their value. Let's make them base and meaningless. Let's trample all meaning. There's nothing holy. There's nothing significant. That instinct of our culture to profane everything, and it's not just for Christians. I mean, except they won't draw Muhammad. They kind of draw they get a big exception there, and then they move on. Is this desire to sort of just make all these things devoid and meaningless? Tear down every statue, trample every flag, strip every sign, every symbol of its significance, and make it common. That seems. I mean, it's so predictable. It's like, oh, you're very edgy, you communion Dorito person. Like how clever. But no, that is again and again and again and again what we see is that. So yeah, I want to guard against the other thing. Just the fact that I've said this is a sign. Signs can be really important. Covenants tend to have signs. And here's a sign that if you blaspheme, if you pervert it, if you twist it, the Lord might kill you. I would take it seriously. So the danger is to say because it's not the thing it signifies, it's not the thing itself. This isn't Jesus in bread and a cup. This is Jesus pictured by his people eating a meal, is to say it's unimportant and to not take it as very seriously. And we'd be warned not to do that. Marriage is a picture of Christ in the church. It's a sign in that sense. I'd take that one seriously. And on and on and on with covenants and signs. So, yeah. Oh, Linda Chisholm. Purple Linda, what you got? You should have been named Lydia, really. Your parents named you wrong.
I keep trying to tell you, she was a seller.
Oh, you're Lydia's
purchaser.
customer. I got it. Okay. I see. Okay.
There's a distinction.
Okay. Fair enough.
Although I probably do have enough to sell. Anyway. Okay, I don't know, this might seem silly, but at the same time, in regards to the transubstantiation, how would they answer an accusation of cannibalism?
I'm not sure. Well, they call it a bloodless sacrifice, but that is what some critique, some of the critics of the Roman Catholic Church have charged them. I'm not entirely sure what they would say to that, so I won't proffer a guess.
So they haven't, on record, answered anyone who's brought that up.
No, and the other challenge is Jesus' body is part of the created order, right? Jesus' body is localized. Jesus' body is not omnipresent. And so it would seem to deny Jesus' humanity if Jesus' physical body can be reproduced infinitely in thousands and millions of Catholic chapels all over the world at the same time, week after week, day after day. It would really seem to stretch the notion that he's really man. I don't know how that works. And they may just say mystery over that, and that's fine. Some things I'll say mystery over as well, but no, I don't know how that's explained away. Because part of the whole thing is you're eating Jesus. You're having union with him precisely through eating his flesh and drinking his blood, not figuratively, literally. So I'm not sure how the charge would go against that. Perhaps someone else might. Okay, Zeb. Microphone for Zeb. Oh, come on. One of you guys. That Daniel Cruz is coming your way. There you go, Zeb.
So I think it goes back to the Aristotelian categories, substance and accidents, that it sure looks and tastes and feels and smells like bread and wine, but at its essence, at its substance, it's really this, where I think that's how they get around also scripturally, there's very clear prohibitions against eating human flesh, and especially drinking any type of blood throughout the Old Covenant. Right. So that's, I think how they would get around that. That it's like, okay, yeah, it's at its essence, it is the body and blood of Christ, but its accidents, its outward appearance, its outward form, it's bread and wine.
All right. Absolutely. Oh, who we got up front? Then we got George. At some point, we got to get to Hocus Pocus. Jorge.
Okay, I have a few. I'll do.
Firstly, my questions are apostolic in number.
12.
13.
13. All right. Yeah, adoption. All right. So number one. So for institution, you talked about there was no confusion at the institution of the supper, and I think that's fair. If you go to John 6, I guess a good question would be: do you think that confusion there doesn't qualify as the kind of confusion that you're looking for in order to say that kind of that transformation is possible?
It's possible. It is. So
okay.
In John 6, we know that many who heard it didn't get, even though I think Jesus gave them the metaphorical key, they think he's really talking about eating flesh and drinking blood. They grumble. This is a hard teaching, and they leave, right? Which is why this by itself is not a foolproof argument, because one could say, you could grant, yes, the disciples didn't take it to mean his body, but how often do they not take things unrightly? Oh, surprise, the disciples are wrong again, right? That's what you could say.
Yeah.
So it's a cumulative case. I wouldn't hinge it on that. I'm saying in the first instance, nobody in that room is going to think that. That's not, and I'm done. It would simply be consider they don't think that. Now, I'd add, they don't write anything to indicate they changed their minds later. That's partly why I tried to deal with as much in 1 Corinthians 11 as I did, because there his sole concern is you're not blaspheming the sacredness of the cup and the bread. You're blaspheming the sacredness of your unity that it pictures. The rebuke is not, you don't properly understand it's God in the bread. You don't properly understand your one body, right? So it would then be, if you grant they didn't think that there, they never correct that error. They never say, hold on, we didn't understand this. Right. So that would be the second part of the argument.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
next question.
The presupposition would be like which one you're taking as a priority structure. Because I could see a Catholic saying that, well, we experienced Catholics saying this, that John 6 takes the priority in interpreting versus 1 Corinthians. So it feels like whichever way you go is going to shape. Do you take the crowd's reason for leaving and the lack of correction by Jesus of their misconception as a proof, or do you take it as no, it's just a circumstance? So how do you adjudicate between those? So
first, I'd say all the internal evidence and all the external evidence suggests John wrote after 1 Corinthians. Certainly after Luke, Matthew, and Mark. So I would not want to let John 6 inform the upper rooms, especially as we were talking yesterday with Luke's. I put a well-ordered thing together. Luke's upper room is meant to be self-contained and understood. And so if Luke meant for us to, you got to understand, a year earlier he said this, and then he would have told us that. He doesn't. So, but the next point would be, if I read John, if you get my take, if you agree that John 6:35 interprets the meaning, it goes against it's really Jesus. Eating is like coming to him. Drinking is like believing in him. So certainly when John's writing, he's aware of the Lord's Supper, no doubt. And so he does link it in 6:4 with the Passover. So I'm fine with taking this meaning forward. But first, read it in 6, understand it, and then if you want to move that forward, I got no problem with, I mean, I think my fourth point at the end was we picture our ongoing feeding on Jesus. Would be me taking John 6 and moving it to the Lord's Supper. But to ignore the immediate context, which defines it, and then trying to mash that into Luke 22 just seems bizarre. So if you want to start with John 6, cool, start with John 6 and finish John 6 before you move on to something else, I guess would be my priority. You can't just sort of grab some of it and then try to interpret it from Luke. Finish your exegesis of John 6. If you want to start there, that's cool. If you want to end there, that's cool. But do your study of John 6, and then take that and mesh it with the other stuff.
That's fair. Do you want me? I can take a break and then come
No,
back.
you got go. You got a minute. We're good.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, is that? Oh, sorry. I apologize. Zeb disagrees.
No, not too much. Just a point of clarification on John 6. In verse 66, after this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. That was after his statement of his sovereignty in salvation, his sovereignty as he was
his
explaining
identity.
it.
I've come down from heaven. How?
Yeah.
This is Jesus whom we know. How
Right.
has he said, I've come down from heaven?
So it seems like they were like, this is kind of weird when he was going on. Obviously, the Jewish leaders who were experts in the law were stumbling over the flesh and blood talk.
Yeah.
But it seemed like the crowds were still mostly with him at this point, but it was really like 60 through 65 where he says that this is why I told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted by the Father.
The counter to that would be 52, right there has the link to the development of the dispute among the Jews and the grumbling afterwards. Does that make sense? Yeah, that counter? Okay. So it just would be a presupposition on how you take.
But prior to that would be 41.
Yeah.
What's the first thing they grumble about?
Yep.
His claim to be from heaven.
Yep.
And then I'd say through John's gospel, it's his claim to be from God. It's his claim to be the Son of God that is going to drive him to the cross. Yes. So the first thing they grumble about is, how does he say he came down from heaven? We know where he was born. We know his parents are. Who do you think you are?
And that was where there was clearly conflict brewing all through this.
Now in 52, they clearly also trip up over the metaphor of his flesh and blood.
Right.
But that's still connected. But
there's also the distinction. 52 is talking Jews in most of John is referring to the religious leaders, not necessarily like the average run-of-the-mill guy on the streets of Judea. And really, it was in verse 60. It wasn't the Jews; it was his disciples. It was those who had been following him.
That could cut both ways.
Agree. Yeah, I'll acknowledge that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Fair enough. I've taken the mic a while. I can come back and get steps to that.
Yeah, anyone else want to jump in with a question before George continues? He's only here for like this week, maybe one more week, so like I'm fine letting him have some priority. If you ever heard me reference my friend I get in like discussions and debates with, this is George. He's a great guy, good guy.
I'm here. All week.
Okay, questions on any of this? Okay, let's talk about hocus pocus. Okay. I just find this fascinating. This is one of those things I heard in a sermon, and I thought it was like one of those preaching stories that like isn't true. There's some things like you'll hear like that'll preach, and it's totally made up. This is real. You can check this out. So, very quickly, one of the questions the church, all of us have to answer, but the church answered, is what makes a rite or a sacrament valid in its administration? And you've got basically three options. The validity is found in the one doing it, the validity is found in the doing of it properly, and the validity is found in the one receiving it. Okay? Very simply. And so when the church was legalized in the 4th century, the Donatist controversy came because the church assumed the legitimacy of baptism and the legitimacy of these ordinances was found in the one doing it. And so in that case, what do you do if the person who baptized you became an apostate? Are you still legitimately baptized? What if the priests who laid hands on you to make you a bishop, 2 or 3 of them denied the faith, offered incense to Caesar, and apostatized? What then? And so there's a couple of problems, but one of the problems they had to deal with was this. Augustine settles the issue by saying, and if you listen to Sproul, I get this from him, that the rites or ordinances or the sacraments are rightly administered if they're done the way they're told, the way they're said to be. So that would mean if someone who later proved to be a rank unbeliever administered the Lord's Supper, but he did it according to the Scripture, it's proper and it works. It works ex operatus operata, through the working of the work. What that becomes like is like a magic spell. And I don't say this to be rude. What I mean is because the claim is when the priest reads the words of invocation, this is my body, it literally becomes Jesus' body. Because they think the rite is doing something, things are happening, then saying it properly, doing it properly is what causes it to happen. And so in the late Middle Ages, in the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, in Luther's time, simony, the buying of ecclesiastical posts, was a big deal. And so if you were a landed gentry, if you were a nobleman, your first son was going to be the heir, and your second son would either be a priest or go into the military. And so frequently, for your second and third sons, for your illegitimate sons, they would buy ecclesiastical posts. And part of the reason Rome could get away with this is because even though these people were untrained, even though these people may actually not prove to be believers, as long as they conduct the Mass properly, it works. It works through the working of the work. At what part in the Latin Mass, then, does the bread become the body of Christ? Hor es corpus, or, as it became known, hocus pocus. That is completely legitimate. That sounds too fanciful. But no, it became cordis es corpus, hocus pocus. And so the notion that in shorthand of something presto changeo, transferring, the commoners heard this enough, and that's the point in the Mass where it happens. That's where that phrase hocus pocus came from. Anyway, just interesting. Okay. I thought that's interesting. Anyway. Now you like this? Okay. All right. Thanks, Eric. It's a Halloween theme. There you go. Okay. Okay. Any other questions? We got about 10 minutes here to go. So, otherwise, George, the next question. George, come on. Okay. You ready? Well, you need a microphone. We're not ready till you have a microphone. I'm decidedly not ready. Now I'm ready.
All right. Fair enough.
Okay.
Okay. The salvific. Let's do this one. So, in terms of doing this in remembrance of me, what are your thoughts about remembrance being a callback to Old Testament language for offerings? So, like, I'm thinking Exodus, was it 28? So I wrote a few of them because I was looking. Exodus 28, 29. There's some language in some other places, but you could look.
No, that is the Catholic argument for the memorial being an actual sacrifice. It comes off of the fact that remembrance language can, at times, admittedly, be used as the thing.
Yeah.
And I would say, based on that verse alone, that would be a possible interpretation.
Sure.
And then I'd say keep reading, go to Hebrews, read the other passages.
Sure.
No. But no, fair enough. That language could be used in that way. Certainly, it could be used in that way. The problem, though, is without transubstantiation, it's just a memorial. So you need both. In order, part of the reason I put the Catholic teachings in the order I did, you can't have it be the real sacrifice until it's the real Jesus. So you can say this language is similar to memorial offerings that still do things. Sure, totally. But if it's not really Jesus, there's no meaningful way of speaking this is Jesus' sacrifice. So that argument doesn't work without first establishing it's really Jesus in the bread and wine. And so if you haven't established that, I will freely grant that particular phrase could possibly link with and could possibly be used that way.
Off of that idea, it seems some of the reformers think that the Eucharistic structure should be maintained, but the metaphysical stuff, like the transformation into Jesus.
So consubstantiation?
Right. Well, consubstantiation, like Calvin's whole thing on the spiritual presence, we talked about that, but...
let me cover this. So among the reformers, there broadly are three positions. Let's say four, because we got the Catholic position, number one. Luther is consubstantiation, and basically no one but Luther went there. And I tend to think Luther was trained to have such a high view of the Lord's Supper. And, I mean, the first time he offered the Mass, he trembled. He was so fearful because he's holding God in his hands that he actually spilled some of the cup. No, I mean, this is how serious he took it. Personally, I think Luther never got over that. So consubstantiation is really saying, okay, it doesn't actually really become physically the body and blood, but spiritually in, with, and around it is. And I tend to think that's less because he's got a biblical argument and more because he's trying to hold on to what he had. He was trained Catholic. So what you get with Calvin and the Reformed Church is spiritual presence, which I think Luther's sort of saying, but he's saying a bit more than that. And that's why I was saying this morning, if you want to argue that Jesus is especially present, there's a particular grace, there's a particular closeness when we take the Lord's Supper, I can't argue that. I can't argue that. Whatever Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians 5:4, whenever you gather together, and I'm with you in spirit, and the power of our Lord Jesus is with you. Is Jesus especially present when we gather together as a church? Sure. I don't have the weights and measures to quantify it, but if you want to say, I believe that when we take the Lord's table in remembrance of him, when we do it properly, he's particularly close, there's a particular grace, there's I can't argue that. You know what I mean?
Right.
Fair enough.
Right.
The wording is, it's not in the bread, and it's not in the cup. It's in, and that's partly where the sign is bigger than the bread and the cup. The sign is the people of God acting like a loaf together. It is, we partake in the sign or the dance or whatever you want to call it. We become part of the sign. That's what hit me like a bomb going off this week. For as long as you all eat this bread and you all drink this cup, you proclaim. The sign, we're the sign at that point. We're proclaiming, we're signifying something. So people want to speculate spiritual closeness. Calvin wants to say that the church is caught up into heaven. Like, when he starts trying to bullet point delineate it, I think he's going a bit far.
Sure. Because
I want text to back it up. But if you want to say, I think it's particularly special and powerful, cool. Like, I'm not going to argue with you about that. That's fine. My main point is, these don't become special pieces of bread. This doesn't become special wine outside of, and this is, okay. So like this pulpit was made by a church, and there are members from that church here, and as we use this pulpit more and more, this pulpit might take on special significance to us. This is not a holy pulpit. Now, in one sense, we might hold it near and dear to us. There might be your favorite chair you sit in, right, or something like that. And so it's fine in one sense to be endeared to certain things, but there's not like holiness in this pulpit, right? That's not the case. So this memorial that we do together, this sign, this dance that we take part in together when we take the Lord's Supper rightly, is a special thing, and that you have, and that the Lord gives grace when we act in faith, in love, by his Spirit, and that he may choose to be particularly close at such times. Yes, 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 yes. So these are really special pieces of bread and really special cups of wine. No. It's the people, it's the whole package, the people doing it. With it, that is something. So that's all I'm trying to make for this point. I tend to be more comfortable saying it's just a sign. So if someone will say spiritually, Christ is more present, if you say so, okay.
Present to judge, or to make sick.
Yeah, sure, totally, yeah.
Fair enough.
I'm not gonna squabble over it.
Fair enough. Okay, the fact that you can get drunk, what does that imply about what they're drinking?
Oh, it's wine. Of course it is.
Great. Good. Okay. Great.
Of course it is. Yes.
Awesome. And then for the doing this as often as you meet together in remembrance, do you think that should mean, and this is like a serious thing, do you think that the early church is doing this at love feasts regularly?
I think they're doing it daily.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No, and so let's take the criticism here. The danger for us, because I'm affirming our tradition, what I believe, what I argue today, is that there isn't warrant to argue for a particular extreme grace from this, is to minimize its importance. There's no doubt as you read through Acts, they're breaking bread house by house, day by day. And they're almost certainly having this meal day by day. We do it month by month. There are some churches that do it once a year because they link it with Passover. And so the danger we're likely to fall into in our camp is to under-prioritize, undertake seriously, underesteem the Lord's Supper. That's absolutely the ditch this church, our denomination, is likely to fall into. And I think churches that do it every Sunday, that's fantastic. If I could wave my little magic wand, we'd probably have a 3-hour service. We'd sing 2 or 3 more songs, and we'd do communion every Sunday. That'd be great. Now, I don't think we're wrong for not doing it. We would also have wine and juice, if I could snap my fingers and do it properly. I'm not going to fight over it, but the further you get from the sign, the harder it is for the sign to do what it's supposed to do. So you get in these thought experiments. If you were on a desert island and all you had was a Pepsi and a Dorito, could you do the Lord's Supper? Like, I guess God will judge. Should I?
No.
You got things other than Pepsi and Doritos? Well, no. And so one of the things that I find difficult, like another thing I do if I could snap my fingers and we had like unlimited time, I would have it be seen that the bread and the wine come from a common vessel, because your and my individual cups that we never see coming from a common source do not, in and of themselves, communicate what 10:17 says. We're one loaf. I never saw this bread as one loaf. Yep. So I have to work at it mentally to remind myself of that. Likewise, wine is a feast. It's a wedding banquet. This is anticipating his coming again, bringing the wedding feast to the Lamb. Grape juice, not so much. And so it's not that it's wrong, but there are parts of the sign that are not present. And I get why we do grape juice, because there are some people who struggle with these things because it's not the thing itself. There's some freedom. But honestly, if you want to use wine, use wine. Like, it's the most natural thing. Yeah. I certainly wouldn't oppose doing it the way it was done in the first instance.
Yes.
You know? So for all those reasons, if I could snap my fingers and do it. That said, I have no problem with how we do it. But yeah, if we could just have Jeremy Church, it would look a little bit more like that.
All right, last one.
Okay.
Hey,
Till Tuesday. Oh, someone else is going?
I can wait.
Oh, Renee. Yeah.
Salvation by faith alone.
Salivation by faith alone.
Salvation by faith alone. In the Catholic Church, the word sacrament means means of atonement. So when I look at their ordinances that they have that they call sacraments, if that means means of atonement, you are adding to what Jesus has done. Right. So salvation by faith alone is the huge point.
So that was another point that I dropped down. I was going to my intro with all my qualifications, sacrament or ordinance. So in the American, you're right, that's what Catholics mean. In the American Heritage Fourth Edition Dictionary, sacrament has two meanings, one of which I can live with, one of which I do not like. So I far prefer ordinance over sacrament, but I have brothers and sisters in Reformed churches who call it a sacrament, and as long as they mean definition 1, not definition 2, well, okay, I have questions. Anyway, sacrament. So here's the definition of sacrament in my dictionary. Number 1, a rite believed to be a means of or visible form of grace. A means of or visible form of grace. Well, even visible form, it's a sign of grace. Okay. In the Eastern Roman Catholic, some Western churches, any traditional view of 7 rites that are instituted by Jesus, recorded in the New Testament, and confer sanctifying grace. In most Western Christian churches, the 2 rites, baptism and the Eucharist, which were instituted by Jesus to confer sanctifying grace. Definition number 2. A religious rite similar to a Christian sacrament or in character and meaning. Definition 3, the Eucharist. 3b, the consecrated elements of the Eucharist. So I think there's room to use the term sacrament, and I'm not having... I much prefer ordinance because it never means the part of that I don't want it to mean. And certainly when Rome uses the term, they mean a necessary means of saving grace. They're quite clear. The sacraments, the continued use of the sacraments are necessary for salvation. So there are some people who refer to them as sacraments. I'm not going to fight over the term, but there's a reason I don't like using it, because I will never miscommunicate with ordinance. Yes. Back to George. Who's got the question now? We have, we're at time, so this has got to be fast. George, quick.
All right.
Bring us home, George.
Well, all right. I'm trying to condense it. Okay, so do you have an objection to the Eucharist as a sacrifice of thanksgiving if there is no recapitulation of Jesus' own sacrifice?
Sure. If you want to say it's a sacrifice of praise, there's biblical warrant for that.
Yeah, okay.
Right? I mean, I would not want to use language that anyone, given how prevalent the Roman Catholic Church is in its teaching, I would probably not speak that way. But if I could speak that way amongst people, there'd be no misunderstanding. As a sacrifice of praise, sure, it's a sacrifice of praise, absolutely. There's reasons I'm going to probably not talk that way. Anyway, thank you all. Godspeed. God bless. Good day. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a happy Reformation Sunday. God bless.